Hi everyone, my name is Beverly Allen and I'm excited to partner with the Pierce County Law Library for their Vibrant Community series. This video is specifically part of the Family Law Self-Help video series. And today I'll be addressing how to do child support worksheets. I'm also going to touch on how to read and interpret an LES statement, which stands for Leave and Earnings Statement, and it is the Department of Defense paycheck. There are some questions that I often hear regarding LES statements, so I would like to combine them both for you in this video. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so on the left of my screen, this is the LES statement in question. You'll notice that it's got entitlements, which is the money that the soldier receives. It also has some deductions which are being taken out. And it also has information regarding this particular soldier. We know this is an E5, which is a sergeant. We know that they have 7 years of service, that they began service on or about January 24th, 2013, and that they are due to ETS, which means estimated time in service or when they leave the military in 2022, and that they're in the Army. This paycheck covers the entire month for April 2020, and that's good because when it comes to pay and deductions, you're looking at the monthly snapshot. So if what you have, for example, is a W-2 instead of an LES or instead of a paycheck, you could divide all of those numbers, that income and that taxes, you could divide that by 12 to get your monthly figures. But for now, we're going off of what's already provided because it's for an entire month. So to get to this website, it's the Washington State Child Support Calculator. You just put that in your search engine here, and it's the second item that pops up here. So this is a blank one. I've started to fill that out here for this particular scenario. And I'm going to call parent 1 Joe Smith, and I'm going to call parent 2 Jane Smith. In this example, Joe is 35, Jane is 30. I selected Pierce as the county, and I made up a number. This might actually be a real case number. I don't know, I just made it up for this demonstration. All right, so Joe in this scenario and Jane, let's pretend they make the same income. So they're both sergeants, the military has a set schedule, and for the purposes of this scenario, we're just going to use the same numbers. So there's a couple of portions of the entitlements that I have to explain for you. First of all, base pay is going to be the typical wages. So on this worksheet, it goes over to 1A, and the wages are $30.94.50. I often get asked, well, what about the BAS and the BAH? And first I have to define those terms. The BAS is Basic Allowance for Subsistence. It's essentially a food budget. BAH is Basic Allowance for Housing. Now, the military does base that based on where someone is located. So, for example, Bremerton may have a different rate than Seattle, may have a different rate than Oklahoma. There are different rates set for each area. Taxes. When it comes to taxes, that is found on the worksheet here in section 2. So before I move on though, I should note that I've combined other income on line section 1E, and that number is the BAS plus the BAH. That's that food budget plus that housing budget that the military provides on top of pay. So for the income taxes, Washington State does not have a state tax. And in this case, this LES shows that they are not being taxed from a different state. Now, you may see a state tax section here, even if they live in Washington. If someone is here just for military reasons and is still paying taxes for a different state, if so, you'll want to combine those two taxes on line 2A. But in this example, we don't have that. FICA, that's line 2B. That's a combination of Social Security and Medicare. So I've added those two figures together. This other column here is a life insurance policy. That is not one of the recognizable deductions here for the worksheets. So I did not include that. So in this case, this does the math for us. What we have is each party has the same net income. In this case, it's $4163.10. And unsurprisingly, section 6, which is the proportional share of income, is even. It's 50-50. You won't often see this, but in this example, they do make exactly the same. All right. The other parts that I want to draw your attention to here are the different expenses that you can get credits for. So the healthcare insurance premiums paid for the children. How do you determine that? Well, if you do have a cost of insurance breakdown that shows how much the coverage is for the employee plus the employee's children, and then you have a separate breakdown that shows just the employee, then to find the cost of the children's premium, you need to deduct the cost of the employee from the cost of the employee plus children. Let's just put a number here for this example, and we're going to say that's $74. Now that doesn't actually work for a military family, but I want to show you how that affects the calculations. For a military family, they would be drawing TRICARE. That does cover active duty at no expense. Now for Guard and Reserve, there may be a number here. So let's just assume that this was the Guard or Reserve number. All right, so daycare expenses. If you already know what you'll be paying for daycare, you can include that in this section. Let's assume that in this case that Joe is going to be providing support to Jane, and Joe is also covering right up front the entire cost of daycare. Let's just say that's $600. Oh, and I should mention in this example, I've named the child Chloe Smith. So for Chloe, let's assume her daycare is $600 a month. And then let's say that there is a special school program that's $1,200 a month that Jane covers. All right, so you'll notice that there are combined daycare and special expenses for the child. This does affect the amount of support and credits that each parent is entitled to, as you can see in section 16. So in this case, Jane would be getting a credit of $1,274. Joe would be getting a credit of $674. All right, so the standard calculation, what is that? The standard calculation is one of the most important numbers as you fill out the worksheets. What that means is how much each parent, after credits and after deductions, is expected to contribute to the upbringing of that child. In this case, Joe's standard calculation is $950. Jane's is $350. Now, if Jane has primary custody, meaning she's been designated the custodian and she has more overnights than Joe does, the money flows from Joe to Jane. Now, if Joe has primary custody, then Jane would be paying Joe that $350. All right. So section 20 here, household assets, household These are typical calculation of the support figure, which is why we usually leave them blank. However, it could be useful if you do have this information to show the court how much assets each parent has and how much debt each parent has. The other way to do that, of course, is by filling out a financial declaration, which you should do, and the court may require if you are asking for child support or if child support is an issue. Other household income. This also comes up frequently, especially if either side has remarried or has moved in a new domestic partner. This income information does not go into the calculation of child support either, but the court needs to know this information. I don't usually see this section, which 22D, income of children. That hardly ever applies. If the child is an actor or a model, I suppose it would apply. That's not normally the case. Income from child support would be if a parent had other children with another parent and they're receiving support for that parent. Assistance programs, this would be public assistance programs, and that would go there. Non-recurring income, I don't often see this section filled out either. It's typically just left off, but that would be, say, for example, bonuses that don't typically apply. Okay. And you can also include other children that each household pays support for that aren't part of the case that you're talking about here. And you can also add the names and ages of children and indicate which household they live in. All right, section 26 is actually a very important box. It is often left blank. It should not be left blank because section 26 is how you explain that you've calculated these incomes. So in this case, what I would say is both parents' incomes are identical and are based off of their April 2020 LES statement. Okay. And then once you have this form completed, you'll want to click Prints because that gives you a PDF. All right, so now you have a PDF. And again, the most important sections to pay attention to are section 6, the proportional share of income. I'll explain how that works in the child support order in a separate video. The second most important section here is section 17, which is the standard calculation here. In this case, Joe's standard calculation is $950, and because of the credits we have here, those education credits that we gave Jane, her standard calculation is $350. All right, so watch in the next video series for how to fill out a child support order based on this information. And again, you can get this information online by Googling Washington State Child Support Calculator. You can also use the calculator that's available in FamilySoft, which is in the Pierce County Law Library.